So, welcome again back to the Quantum Leap business show, going around the world 24 hours non-stop. Today on the 24th of June. Today it's my great pleasure at this time to welcome a gentleman that I first met over 40 years ago. And I was with the company called MLC Life in Australia. And this gentleman came in and spoke about this funny, weird, new experience about mindset and all sorts of different things. And we took it as a bit of a joke. 40 years later, it's certainly not a joke, and it's at the forefront of a lot of modern thinking. It's my pleasure today to welcome, it used to be called Dr. Feelgood, Phil Jauncey. So Phil, welcome to the show.
Good to be here. Good to talk to you again after all those years.
Phil, performance psychologist. That's an interesting term. It's probably better known now than it was 40 years ago, but give the audience an overview of what it is.
Well, you see, a lot of people come to a psychologist to feel good. And yet what people really want is to do good. So performance psychologists, like I've been to 3 Olympics, been to multiple world championships, things like that. And so in sport, people don't want to feel good. I often ask people in sport, when's it more important you feel good, before a game or after a game? A lot of them say before the game. So, oh, great, you felt good before the game, but you sucked. You're terrible. No, you want to feel good after the game. And same thing in business. In business, I don't want to be positive at the beginning of the financial year. I want to be positive at the end of the financial year. I want to look at, are the things that I did make my company profitable, not only successful, but also for my employees, they're better off. My clients, they're better off. They're doing better. So performance psychology is saying, is the performance improving or is it not? Now, sadly, and I get a lot of criticism. As you said, years ago, I was a bit of a rebel. Well, I still am. And I get criticism because people say, no, psychology is getting your mind right. For example, I hear people say, you got to get your mental set right. Well, as I say in cricket, does the ball or the bat care how you feel? Do your clients care whether you're positive or not? What they really care about is, are you providing a service that's going to make them better off or not? For example, in this program, are people watching it because they want to feel good, or they're watching it because they're saying, after watching it might help me perform better? So performance psychologist is all about looking at, why do people perform well and why do people perform badly? And I find that generally speaking, people don't know. They haven't worked out the way their brain works. They haven't worked out one of the biggest failures that people make. For example, you mentioned mindset. I have a basic rule. If you can't see it, you can't fix it. So I've never seen a mindset. I've never seen an emotion. I've never seen a motivation, never seen a thought. Now, I tell people I have over 50 years clinical experience in psychology, 4 degrees, including a doctorate in psychology. And I can't control my mind and I can't control my emotions. So what chances every person has? For example, John, if I'm angry at you, I have no control of that emotion. It may be false, it may be valid, but I have no control over feeling angry. What I do have control is my response to that emotion, making things better or making things worse. For example, let's assume you've just got a job I think I deserve, and I think you backstabbed to get it. Yep. Do I have any control over feeling jealous? Absolutely not.
Yep.
But if I say, listen, you backstabbing bastard, everybody says, well, thank heavens, we didn't give the job to Phil. But if I say, listen, John, I thought I was better for the job. I thought I should got the job. How can I help you? In other words, in any situation, we always have the ability to ask ourselves, is what we're doing making it better? Now, one of the keys of performance psychology is absolutely everything that we do is our fault. For example, we're talking over 2 hemispheres. I have no idea what's going on in your head, what you expect. And one of the things I teach people, it's really important in life, they understand the difference between aims and goals. An aim is, for example, an athlete wants to win. But there are things that could stop him or her winning. For example, in Australia years ago, we had this athlete by the name of Grant Hackett. He was a swimmer.
Yep.
And he broke a world record. but he came second to a guy named Thorpe,
All
who
the
broke a
time.
world record in the same race.
Yep.
Now, he failed in his aim, but he didn't fail in his goal. And a goal is where you say to yourself, what do I have to do to give me the greatest chance of achieving my aim? For example, at the end of this video, I'm hoping I've helped you and your viewers, but I can't guarantee that. Some of your viewers saying, listen, we've already sold our cow, have no use for your bull now. They could be saying, we don't listen to a dinosaur. I can't control their reaction. What I can control is over 50 years, I found that when I give these messages to people, they leave helped. So my goals are, I need during this interview to cover those things.
Yep.
And if I do that, I've succeeded. I may not achieve my aim because people might say, that's not what we want to listen. Matter of fact, I was talking to a group just almost a year ago now, and 99% of them loved it. Said it's really helpful. But one person in it said, no, that's bad. Because I teach that don't let anybody tell you that you have a situation going in life that handicaps you so much that you can't make a little bit better. And she'd felt really good about it's not her fault. Now, I did all the things, the vast majority of people said it was a wonderful presentation, but she complained. Now, did I fail because she complained? No. I did what I found in my experience works for most people. So one of the real keys in business and in life is make sure we never set aims for goals.
Yep.
Because if you can't see it, for example, you mentioned mindset. I can't control my mindset. You know, right now, I'm talking when it's just after 6 p.m. in Brisbane. Now, it's quite different in England. Does the weather matter about what we're talking about? Absolutely not. And I often talk to people about plan A and plan Z. Now, my plan A is speak really quickly, tell really bad jokes. For example, why'd the guy call his girlfriend Hinges?
No
She's
idea.
something to adore. Why'd the guy get rid of his vacuum cleaner? It sucked. Now, let's imagine that I've had a really, really bad day. Let's imagine that my wife had picked on me. I always tell people when my wife and I got married, we had something in common. She loved me and I loved me. Let's assume that I had a headache. Whatever. Does anything stop me speaking quickly, telling bad jokes? And the answer is no. And so one of the sad things that's happened in our society, people have been told you need to feel good to act good. And that's absolute crap. Sorry about that. But
Yep.
You don't have to feel good to act good. I mean, I've just been reading something about World War II and England and how when the Blitz was on, people weren't feeling positive. You know, Churchill did his best, but nobody believed him. You know, they had rations, and yet the people acted like they believed. From a German perspective, that stage, they saw a nation who were totally positive. And
Yep.
yet we all know that if you went in the streets of London in those days, they weren't positive. They were grumbling. They hated Winston Churchill's guts, as always happens with politicians. And the thing about it was, it didn't matter how they felt. It mattered how they acted.
Yep.
And in life, it's all about what we do, not how we feel. My dad was a psychologist. And years ago, a man came to him and said, oh, Dr. Jauncey, I've fallen out of love with my wife. I want to divorce her. My dad said, fine. What I want you to do for the next 5 days, do something special for wife every day. Like what? Take her out to eat, buy her some flowers. On the 6th day, we'll talk about the divorce. He came back on the 6th day, said, oh, Dr. Jauncey, I'm embarrassed. My dad said, why? I fall in love with my wife. See, what had happened, he was waiting to feel romantic to act romantically, but it's the other way around. When you act romantically, you feel romantic. In other words, what I teach, you don't have to feel good to act good, but when you act good, it feels good. And the good thing about that is I am totally in control of my actions.
Yep.
I
Fantastic.
am not in control of my mind. So with COVID-19, how many people were positive, especially in England, where all those deaths are coming. We've been fairly fortunate in Australia. We got this thing called an ocean around us, and we've kept it away. But the point about it is, when you're going through that, are you positive? Of course you're not. But are you saying, am I doing the best I can to deal with this situation in a way that makes it better? In other words, what I talk about this difference between winners and losers. And winners don't always win. For example, in sport, we talk about regret and disappointment. Grant Hackett was disappointed. He swam a great race, but didn't win. Whereas regret is where I didn't swim the race I could have won and I lost. So in life, for example, in this interview, if I do all the things that I find work and it doesn't work, at the end, I'll be disappointed, but I won't have regret. But if for some reason I said, oh, I'm talking with England, I'm doing all this and that, and I change what I do, I'll have regret. An illustration I give of this is if I put in this office here a plank, it's got carpet down. And I said, John, I want you to walk the plank without touching the carpet. Dead easy.
Yep.
Right? So now I put that plank outside 10 stories over the road.
Yep.
Plenty of light, no wind. I said, listen, I want you to walk the same plank without falling. Now, what happens? You change.
Yep.
See, up top, you leant back, and you look down. Here, you lean forward and looked up. So your brain says, when you look forward, lean forward and look up, I'll give your computer, let you walk. Now, if you fell 10 stories up, you would have regret, besides being dead, because you stopped doing what worked for you.
Yep.
On the other hand, if you leant forward, walk quickly like you did here and fell, you'd be disappointed. But at least you said, I gave myself the best shot of not falling. About 18 years ago, my son Timothy was 18 at the time, and he had been playing indoor soccer, broke his elbow, and had it rewired. Now we have like a 3-tier house. Like right now, I'm upstairs. We go down to the major living area, and then there's a downstairs. So you get the idea. Now he was coming down the stairs from here. Actually, I'm actually in the room that was his room before he left, and he's now got a doctorate in psychology, poor guy. Anyway, he was going down and he slipped because we just washed the carpet. So he twisted to protect his elbow. When he hit the bottom, he hit a pot plant, severed his kidney. ICU. Now, fortunately, a rhinologist saved his kidney. But the very next day, I was running this 2-day course, a manager training leadership course. I said, don't talk about training, talk about education. The difference is training, you teach people what you want them to hear. Education, they learn what they need to learn. A slight difference there. Yep. Anyway, so I was running this education course, and I was speaking quickly, telling bad jokes and talking about Tim. And somebody said, how can you be so upbeat with your son in hospital? I said, would it help Tim for me to be downbeat? Well, no. Would it help me to be downbeat? No. Would it help you for me to, no. So I should be downbeat. Well, everybody knows. When you don't feel good, you can't act good. I said, listen, people, let's imagine that if you're here and everybody's so depressed, life sucks so much you need 3 straws, and a fire breaks out, and you know if you don't leave, you're going to die excruciating death. I said, how many of you say I would leave, but I'll wait till I'm not depressed anymore? See the faces. I said, let's be positive. Hey, people, I got a bar of gold bullion for each one of you, and you got to get it within 120 seconds. How many say, well, I would get it, but I'm depressed? And getting back to that guy, he said, I fall in love with my wife, and he'd stopped acting romantically. Once he started acting romantically, he started feeling romantic. Yep. In other words, the purpose of positive doing is you don't have to feel good to act good. You have to act good to feel good. And there's 2 questions I ask everybody I talk to, whether it be kids, adults, whatever. And that is, if you're arrested on charges of trying to be successful, would there be enough evidence to convict you? So those people that said, oh, if only we didn't have COVID-19, if only. So is the way you're responding to this disease making it better or worse? It's not my fault. I know. Just like that fire, it wasn't people's fault. But is the way they're responding making it better or worse? And we always have to ask ourselves that question. And then, so rather than saying, if only things were better, because you never say if only when it's true. So I wouldn't be saying if only I was talking to you right now. If only we'd met in 1979.
Yep.
They're all true.
Yep.
So you can only say if only when it's not true. So when anybody says if only, what they're saying is, I feel good about failing until things beyond my control change. So I feel good about failing because of COVID. I feel good about failing because of whatever. Winners in life, they say, is what I'm doing getting me where I want to get? So those two questions. Question number one, if you're arrested on charges of trying to be successful, would there be enough evidence to convict you? Or would your parents to get up, listen, your worship, Phil Jauncey talks big, wins a lot, never done anything. And question number two, is what you're doing getting you where you want to get? So if I'm here and I say I want to get there and you see me going this way, you say, Phil, you're going the wrong way. Yeah, but I have good intention. I want to get there. Remember years ago, I was talking to an Australian tennis player who has a big temper. And I said, why do you throw the racket down? He said, because I got angry. I said, okay. What's the next point like when you throw the racket down? It was bad. Okay. So when you see the opponent throw the racket down, what do you think? It's good because I'm winning.
Yep.
And I waited for him to understand. He didn't. Now, the point about that is, in life, we always have to ask ourselves a simple question. Is what we're doing working? And if it's not, why are we doing that? Because it's a basic law of physics. For things to change, things have to change. So when people come to me, what my role is explain how the brain works. Because if you don't understand that, you will fail. Now, I know you've only asked me one question. I'm going on and on and on, but I really want to do this. Why do people, do you think, get bad thoughts? And don't worry if you don't know, most people don't. You know, sometimes you get a thought that bothers you and you can't get rid of it, or you get negative and you can't get rid of it. Why do you think that happens?
Some sort of external influence of that you don't have any control over?
Absolutely wrong, but good guess.
Okay.
And I'm not putting you down because most people say the same thing. I get two major reasons people give. They're both wrong. One is something external was so powerful, for example, the Blitz, that people couldn't possibly be positive. And yet we've already talked about that. That wasn't true.
Yep.
Or two, the importance of it. For example, I know that I have a test coming in to find out whether I have fatal cancer or not. So, you know, those are the two logical things, but they're both wrong. And when I say wrong, that sounds like I'm judging people. It makes sense, but it's not the way the brain works. Now, our brain is our willing slave. And the way the brain works, the brain says, I'm only interested in what I see. Now, I should mention this to you myself. I mentioned briefly before. I only talk about things that I can see. I have a basic rule. If you can't see it, can't fix it. Have you ever seen a depression?
Yep.
No.
Nobody
so you can't. But I've seen people depressing. Life's like being on a water ski behind a motorboat. The only thing about the motorboat not to do is stop, because when you stop, you sink. So
Yep.
I've seen people depressing anxiety, but I've never seen anxiety.
Is it more about uncertainty, Phil?
What's that?
Is it more about uncertainty if people
No.
feel whatever
See,
that
uncertainty
is?
is again a mental thing.
Yep.
Again, remember the brain is like me. For example, if you're working for me, I'd never say you have a bad attitude, you're undisciplined, or you're lazy. Well, two reasons. Firstly, the only person who can judge somebody else is a saint. And I've looked in the mirror and there's no Saint Phil.
Yep.
The second reason, though, is I've never seen those things. What I can say is I've known you haven't done 2 to 3 things. You've done 4 to 6 things badly, and you're taking 6 times longer than somebody else. See, when I talk about behaviors can be fixed. You see, I could lie to myself about being a loving dad and a loving husband. Because have you ever seen a loving dad, what's it mean? But if I say, I want to give evidence of being a loving dad, a loving husband, I can't lie about that. For example, as a business manager, I want to be giving evidence that I'm facilitating my staff to be more functioning, more productive, and getting more satisfaction from the work. Now, I can look at that. Am I giving that evidence? I can lie to myself is that I have an open door policy. I care about my staff. I feel good when my staff do well. See, that can all be a lie.
Yep.
And so the only thing we can't lie about are behaviors. So when my kids are little, I said, Daddy, I don't feel like studying. I said, that's great. I don't feel like feeding you. And they study. One's a doctor of medicine now. The other one's a doctor of psychology, as I mentioned. You've only got to send your kids once to school in the pajamas and they're ready on time. So this idea that they didn't feel like it. See, I never felt like studying. My teachers never cared that I didn't feel about studying. My parents had the same rule: no food if you don't study. In cricket, does the ball or the bat care how you feel? And the answer is absolutely not.
No.
So we have this great myth that's been said: if you want to succeed in life, get a great mental thought. For example, we've seen things, Amway, those sorts of stuff over the years, where they had these conferences and everybody got hyped. And you have religions, they get you hyped.
Yep. Bit like the Jordan Belfont. He's been over here. Remember him from the Wolf of Wall Street?
Yes, yes. And so the thing is, the problem with being hyped is what happened when you're not hyped. For example, I've seen people say, look, I love God. I prayed to God because my child got cured from cancer. How good is that? That's wonderful. But then the child died of cancer, so they no longer love God. Or I was really high, but now I've lost my job. I'm down, so I can't have religion. In other words, I felt good at the conference, but on Tuesday, I'm not positive about selling my product. And so when I say, if you're not positive, what skills don't you have to sell your product? What skills don't you have when I'm annoyed to act lovingly towards my wife and my kids? When I'm feeling really down, what skills don't I have to treat a client with dignity and respect and to meet their needs? And so what happens is we've overrated feelings. And so it's important to understand why the brain gives us some feelings. So the brain is like me. The brain never looks at something it can't see. The brain only looks at actions. Now, I call this the front desk secretary of the brain. It's actually called the brainstem reticular formation, but I talk to footy players, so that's a bit complex for them. So basically, what it is, if I'm your secretary, I say, hey, John, I got a message from Fred Blogs, and you don't ring him. Hey, John, I got a message from Fred Blogs, you don't ring him. John, I got a message from Fred Blogs, ring somebody else. I'll stop giving him that message. If I say, John, I got a message for Sam Smith, you ring him right away. I keep giving them a message. So the brain does the same thing. The brain says, John, any message I give you that you act on, I will make that message louder. Any message I give you that you don't act on, make it softer. So for example, if you're in icy cold water and the brain says, get out, it's cold, and you keep swimming. And the brain says, you moron, get out, it's cold, you keep swimming. The brain says, you idiot, get out, it's cold, you keep swimming. The brain turns off the temperature. But if you get out right away, suddenly, and you put your foot back in, it actually feels colder. Because you told brain, I want to know the temperature. When you kept swimming, I don't want to know. I used to live near a refinery and couldn't smell it. People said, how do you handle the palm? Well, because I didn't react to it, didn't smell it.
Yep.
For example, every time the phone rings, I pick up a cigarette. As soon as the phone rings, my brain says, Phil, you need nicotine. But if every time the phone rings, I pick up a carrot, as soon as the phone rings, Phil's brain says, Phil, you need carotene. Now, equally addictive. People say, no, nicotine's far more addictive than carotene. As far as the brain, no. For example, I tell people, where do mistakes come from? Practice. See, I can't make the mistakes you make in your business because I've never practiced them. I never accidentally swear in Russian because I don't speak Russian. If I swear like a trooper all my life, become a priest and say, here's the effing Eucharist. Brain hasn't worked out, not a word that you use in church. If an intimate moment with my wife, I use the wrong name, what you going to know? I've been practicing. So mistakes only come from practice. And so the brain is always saying, how did you react? For example, you're at a party, don't hear anything, suddenly hear your name. Because your brain says you always react to your name. All the other guff you didn't listen to. Or a mom's the only one that heard the baby cry. Because you get a new car, you suddenly see the car on the road.
Yeah.
I tell people I like to watch my weight, so I'll keep it where I can watch it. Anyway, I used to go bike ride. I broke my wrist a couple of years ago. So it's now only 40K a week, but I used to go about 80, 90K a week with my mates. And the first K out, my brain would say, listen, you're a 70-year-old bastard, too old to be doing this. Heart's going thump, thump, thump. And everything's telling me slow down. But I pedal harder. Now, at the end of 80K, logic should tell you I should be more tired, more lactic acid, dehydrated, but I'm less tired. You've been the same thing. You go to work in a gym. After 10 minutes, you're knackered. An hour later, you're less knackered.
Yep. Well, they call that second wind. Or
yeah, because the brain said, I gave you tiredness and you didn't act tiredly. Now, if I'd got off after 1 kilometer, oh, I'm so tired. I'm so tired. Then I have to give a half kilometer.
Yeah.
So one of the keys of positive doing, if you don't want to feel badly, don't act badly. I had this professional squash player. She came to me years ago. And she said, oh, Phil, I get so down in between games. I said, what I want you to do is get a doll's mirror and make the ugliest face you can. Because when you make an ugly face, you can't feel bad. Trust me. If any of your viewers right now go, they can't feel bad. The brain will not let you feel bad. She said it worked so much, she did it during the game, make a mistake with the other girl. And what happened is she got in the top 10.
Yeah.
Now, it didn't matter if people thought she was strange. She's telling her brain, I don't want to feel down. Lee, I was talking to these teenage girls. The boys just get mad when somebody insults it. Girls love to sulk and get gravel rash in the lips. Everybody hates it. And I say, girls, why do you stay in your room for 3 days sulking? Well, she insulted me, but she's gone. Yeah, but she insulted me. I said, how's it feel when you sulk? Bad. So you're not sulking now. We can't do it forever. So how did you decide when you'd had enough honor to the insulter? And they gave me this funny look. So what you're telling me is when you stay in your room feels bad, because the brain makes you feel worse. When you get out of your room, it makes you feel better. And you can see the puzzlement on their face. I had a bowler for Australia. And I said, mate, when you take yourself seriously, don't bowl well, stick your tongue out. And he kept bowling until he was about 46. And people said, why do you stick your tongue out? When I don't stick my tongue out, I vote for Western Australia. When I do stick it out, I vote for Australia.
Yeah.
Now, all this is called positive doing. Our brain says, when things get down, don't act downly. It's like me speaking quickly, telling bad jokes. I can always do that no matter what goes through me. So that takes us to the second thing about the brain. Now, a lot of people have been feeling down during COVID-19, correct? I'm not talking about the people sick, they're obviously down, but the people in businesses and so forth. Now, what is, and this is something many people don't know, what's the purpose of pain? For example, if you're walking on the floor barefoot and you step on a thumbtack, the brain gives you excruciating pain. Why does the brain do that?
To warn you that you need to take some action to stop doing what you're doing because it's going to be a threat to you.
Absolutely spot on. Now, the last thing I need to do is anesthetize that thumbtack so I can't feel it.
Yeah.
Now, when I pull the thumbtack out, does it still hurt?
Yeah. For a little bit, yeah.
It still hurts. Why does it still hurt? Because it's still danger.
Yeah.
It could be infection, got to, whatever I have to do. Now, if there's a stone in my shoe and I pull the shoe off and pull the stone, the pain goes away, correct?
Yep.
So the key here is, and this is where I get in trouble with my colleagues, I believe all pain is good. So if I'm not happy in my business, why is that good?
I want to do something about it.
I need to fix it. Remember, for things to change, things have to change. See, if I'm very positive about my business, but I'm going down the gurgler, is that good? If I'm feeling really good about my marriage, and it's not going well, is that good? So the idea of positive thinking sucks, in my view. I believe in positive doing. That means that anytime I feel pain, my brain is saying, Master, if you keep on with this current strategy, it's going to get worse. Now, in medicine, this is where it's interesting in our society. And again, I want to warn your listeners, I'm not mainstream. I believe I'm right. It's worked for me for 50 years, but there's going to be a lot of you who are going to disagree with me. And if you do, that's okay. If it works for you to be told you've got a condition and you never get better and you got to put up with being worse, and that works for you, good on you. It doesn't work for me. When people come to me, they're saying my life's not working. When they leave, I want them to have a better strategy. but that's my bias. And I've been doing it for over 50 years. Now, if I go to a doctor, I couldn't say, I think I've got cancer and get drugs. Why not?
You need a proper diagnosis.
I need some evidence, because for all problems in life, if you don't know the cause, you can't find a cure.
Yep.
If I'm a consultant and I come to your business, the last thing you want me to do is give you some remedies. What's the first thing you want from me?
Some facts of what's going on, what the current situation looks like, what are the issues.
Remember, if there's no cause, there's no cure. Absolutely right. So the worst thing I could do is say, listen, I've been in a lot of businesses and this and this and this and this works. But it may not be your problem. So what happens is I couldn't say, doctor, I think I got multiple sclerosis. He needs to get evidence. Now, when I broke my wrist, I say, doc, I think I need a cast. He said, we need to x-ray it first to find out whether a cast will do that. In other words, with all real diseases, you need evidence, because without the etiology, which is the medical term for cause, you can't find cure. So if I come to your business, you need me to find an etiology for reasons not working. For example, you have a lot of staff leaving. You want me to find out, okay, what's happening there that people who generally have long-term stays are having short-term in your business. There's no blame here, just saying what's going on. It could be that you're recruiting, you gave them false evidence. Mm-hmm. It could be that you have a manager that has no people skills. It could be lots of things.
Yep.
But until we find the cause, you're no way going to find a cure.
Yep.
The last thing is that you have a positive business.
Yep.
And you care. And you really have high goals. See, that wouldn't help your business at all. Now, what happens is with conditions. Now, a condition is something that's more emotional. Now, if a condition doesn't have a cause, it doesn't have a cure. For example, if I went to the doctor and say, listen, my marriage is breaking up, I will probably leave with a prescription. But there's nothing wrong with me. So what's changed from when I want to cast to my marriage is breaking up? I couldn't get any medical attention until they had evidence with my wrist, but I could get medical intervention with my marriage. What was the difference?
Evidence?
What happens is people believe if you're in the emotional, mental areas, confidence, all those things you can't see, then you don't need evidence. And since there's no evidence, there's not going to be a cure.
Yep.
So all we can give you is palliative care.
Yeah.
As you know, palliative care is if I got horrible cancer and all they can do is make me feel good.
Yep.
So that what happens is people get diagnosed with a condition. And what that means is, many cases, that means some medication, means you just got to put up with it. In other words, no hope of change. And this brings a lot of downness in people. Whereas anytime somebody comes to me, they're in pain. Now, what pain tells me is what they're doing isn't working. So if you're saying, hey, Phil, my business isn't being as successful, or COVID-19's affected my business, you've just told me the way you're dealing with it now is not working. Now, I am not that good to help people know what they have to do in their business, but you are. I always tell people the best coach you get is yourself. So I can ask you questions. What were you doing when it was working? And what have you changed? Getting back to the plank. When you walk leaning forward and fast, you don't fall off because your momentum is going forward. When you lean backwards and go slowly, you'll fall off. And so we can look at what you changed. And so therefore, if I go to a doctor saying my knee's hurting, he will actually give me more pain. And the reason for that is he says, until I find the cause, I can't help the cure. Uh-huh. But if I go to a doctor, say I'm depressing, now notice I only use the verb because you can see it and fix it. He immediately says, oh, depression. And so in his mind, he says, okay, this is a condition. Now, the way the difference is, If I have a fire and the alarm goes off, we turn off the fire before the alarm, right?
Yeah, probably. Yeah, still ringing when it's still going. Yep.
I knew this lady years ago, and showing my age, she had an old FX, which for those overseas was one of the very first Holdens ever made.
Yep. Back in the 50s.
Absolutely. 49, actually, it started.
Yep.
And anyway, her generator light came on. This is before that alternators. So she pulled out the light bulb and wondered why her battery died. Because she thought, if I turn off the alarm, I turn off the cause. And so what happens is, if I have an emotion that's bothering me, people are saying, well, since we can't find the cause for this emotion, I think I know, but they can't find the cause for the emotion, then all we can do is give you palliative care. So we'll pull out the alarm. Now, in fact, when anybody comes to me in pain, what they're telling me is my strategy is not working. I had this girl come to me, 13-year-old, years ago. I said, why are you here? She says, oh, I get really nervous. Now, people don't understand that nerves are fuel. I actually have started more fuel when I started talking to you on the video than I did 10 minutes before. And that's good, isn't it?
Yep.
You want me to have fuel. Otherwise, who are you, John?
Yep.
Yeah, you want me to have fuel. Now, the fuel in your car is good. Just don't take a match to it. And the last thing you want to say to your coach, I had so much fuel, I reduced it by 50%. So what the brain says is, when I give you fuel, do you want to use it to perform or to fail? You had more fuel 10 stories up than you did here. Now, the way the brain works out whether you want to succeed or fail, the brain said, did you stick to plan A or Z? Plan Z, you leant back, went slow. The brain says, oh, you want to fail? I can help you. All right. For example, let's assume I'm talking to a big group. Now, I have a microphone. The last thing I need to do is change how I talk. The microphone should only enhance what I'm doing. The last thing I do, well, I got a microphone. I need to talk a little bit different because this is a microphone and the audience is going to respond differently. No, you expect that with a microphone, it's louder. So an athlete, if they play really good in A grade, and when they play state of origin or for a test match, they don't change. The game lifts them. But the skills required are the same skills. If I'm a batsman and I'm facing a bowler in district cricket or county cricket or test cricket, the things I have to watch, the seam, the bounce are exactly the same. The last thing I want to do is change. I had a guy from Bangladesh. He said, oh, Dr. Phil, I get out in the nervous 90s. I said, how do you bat in the non-nervous 80s? Oh, I lean forward. Bat's higher. It's higher. And I look at the bowler. I said, what do you do in between balls and in the non-nervous 80s? Oh, I walk around. So what do you do in the nervous 90s? Oh, I lean back. I bat slower. I don't look at the bowler. And I don't walk around. You see, I got this straight. When you lean forward, batter high, look at the bowler, you score runs, don't get out. When you lean back, bat slower, and don't run, you don't score runs, get out. What do you think you do tomorrow? He said, go back to plan A. Now, he scored 3 centuries during that World Cup, and he never scored a century before. Now, I'll tell you right now, I'm the last person that you want me to coach you in cricket. I tell people in rugby league, I was so bad I never got sledged. As an athlete, I'm a good psychologist. Now, my point about that is he changed what he did. So the brain said, since you change what you did when it's important, I hope you fail. For example, if I tossed you a tennis ball to catch, how would you catch it? You lean forward and catch it, correct?
Yep.
Because you always lean towards and you let your hand go in the distance of the ball. Now I say, listen, that ball's full of nitroglycerin. And John, if you drop it, you're going to die.
Yeah,
Where's
different reaction. Yep.
Back.
Yep.
Elbows tight.
Yep.
Up.
Yep.
Now, fortunately, the brain said, because you change, you want to die. But I want you to go back, feel tense. Can you go back, watching me now? Tense. And just go like this. Lean forward. Notice how your brain said you can catch the ball. Let's imagine I'm a clarinet player. I'm playing in front of the mirror, practicing, because I have to play at Carnegie Hall in 2 days' time. Are the skills in front of the mirror any different than Carnegie Hall?
No.
They're the same, right?
Yep.
Now, the difference will be I'll have more fuel at Carnegie Hall. Now, the first thing you do when you get more fuel is you lean back. So now, and I've worked with musicians and actors. Matter of fact, the University of Melbourne did a study of my stuff. And they said, Phil, when I was working at ANA, I'm training National Academy of Music. And they said, Phil, we're really surprised, not that the people you work with did better than the people who didn't. What surprised us was that the people you worked with who did better and the people who didn't work with who did worse had the same amount of performance anxiety. See, you want to have fuel with COVID-19, don't you? You want to have energy.
Yep.
The last thing you want to do is relax and feel calm and it's okay.
Yep. Do people call that adrenaline?
Whatever you want to call it, it's fuel. Now, so what I teach people, I want you to be that clarinet player again. Tense, black stick, if you don't know, head down, and just lean forward and go like that. Head, arms up. I can't see your arms. That's it. Notice your arms say you can play clarinet, even though you can't. Now, the way the brain works, the brain says, that clarinet player, if he changed in front of Carnegie Hall, it says you want to fail. But if he stuck to plan A, what the brain said, oh, you want to perform even better. And I've worked with international actors and all these people. I remember one time we had a group of actors for 3 years. We had them at a university. And at the end of the third year, they had to present in front of agents. And if you don't have agents, you don't get there. And one of the things we taught them is this is so important to you, you're going to have more fuel. But make sure you don't change what you would do if it was a rehearsal. So we went through all these little things. Anyway, the agent said, one thing we like about your actors from your university, QUT, is that they don't get nervous. I said, yes, they are. No, they don't see it. They just perform better. So by them sticking to plan A, they use the fuel to perform rather than the fuel to fail. Yep. So getting back, and this is a long answer to your first question. What's a performance psychologist do? A performance psychologist helps people understand the way their brain works. Because you see, my goal is the same goal of any manager, teacher, parent, or coach. My goal is to become redundant. When people come to see me, generally speaking, I only see them once.
Yep.
Because the rules of the game. Because you don't know the rules of the game, how can you perform?
Yep.
What I find people kept thinking, the rules of the game are presented, you got to be positive. You can't be negative. You can't be down. And I'm saying, well, that's pretty normal, isn't it? I just make a mistake in an important game. Am I going to feel positive? Of course I'm not. But I can keep acting positively. We had a forward with the Great Britain, James Graham, and Australia scored a try. And he said, guys, put your left foot forward, because what happens when you feel good, we call it stance. I'm right-handed. So I naturally put my left foot forward to give me balance. He said, put your left foot forward. And Australia didn't score against it. They didn't score against Australia either. But the point is, he'd worked this out. He knew the rules of the game. How often do you see a team when they make a mistake, they make more? Yep. Same thing.
One thing leads to another. Absolutely.
People in a hard time stop doing the things that work for them.
People call that getting on a roll, isn't it? You're building momentum.
I had a real estate agent come to me a few years ago. And he said, oh, my life's spiraling out of control. I said, what have you changed? He says, don't you want to know about what I'm doing? I said, no, I'm worried about what you changed. He said, well, my wife's left me. That's no good. But what have you changed? He said, well, before she left me, I said, well, for a run every morning. And then have a nutritious meal. And when I got to work, I talked to 3 people. I have a joke with them. Make 3 phone calls. And even if I didn't have a property, see, I'll get out on the road. So what are you doing now? I'm not going for a run. Not having a nutritious meal, having a bit of hooch. Not talking to people, not ringing up clients, not getting on the road. As you know, there's 3 rules of sales. Rule number 1 is see the people. Rule number 2 is see the people. Rule number 3 is, and he'd stop doing it. So go back to plan A. Anyway, he rang me a week later, says, life's a lot better and my wife's willing to talk to me. I had a racing driver years ago, said, oh, Phil, I was racing over in Beijing. I got really nervous and raced badly. I said, what did you change? I said, normally I walked the track before the race, but in Beijing I didn't. Normally I took a lot of the 2-way, but Beijing I didn't. Then I looked up and saw my hands are higher in the steering wheel, computer off. Now, if you're driving over 200K an hour, I want computer on. So what have you changed? What do you need to learn? Walk the track, talk the talk. He ran 4 to the next 5 races. And for the next 20 years, a leading racing driver. So the key of positive doing is helping people understand, what do I need to do to keep this computer on?
Yep.
because a computer is only good if it's on. And even if it's on, you leave it long enough, it goes to sleep and you have to push the mouse to get it on again. So my goal with people, and this is something that hasn't changed over 50 years, people still want to know, what do I need to do to be successful? And what do successful people do that I'm not doing? And basically the difference between winners and losers is simple. Winners say everything I do is my fault. Losers is not. Now, if I give you an excuse, if you're my boss or my coach or my parent, why should I never give you an excuse? I'm talking about my point of view, not your point of view. Why is it bad from my point of view?
You abdicate the responsibility.
See, that sounds really good, but go back to behavior. If it's not my fault, what can I not do?
Fix it.
Fix it. See, if I'm driving fast in the pit and somebody says, hey, Phil, you're driving fast in the pit. Sorry, boss. I was behind and under pressure. So, Phil, what we understand here is that you can't work here anymore. What? Well, what you're telling me is anytime you're behind and under pressure, you don't have the ability to drive safely and to keep your workmates safe. You see, there's only 4 reasons why we fail in life. Number 1, we don't know what to do. Now, if I give you an instruction, say, I want you to live somewhere where I live, and I haven't told you where I live, that's a bad instruction. But if you're a winner, what's the first thing you do? Hey, boss, where do you live? If you're a loser, you never deliver it. Boss, you never told me where you lived. Or I say, listen, I want you to go down the pit today, do A, B, and C, and D. Sure, boss. At the end of the day, I haven't done B and D. I've never been trained in B and D. So this morning I said, what you're thinking. Now, the second reason you fail is you don't know how. Now, for example, I mentioned I was bad at rugby league. Now, when I played rugby league, we never kicked. Now, when I was working with the Brisbane Lions Aussie rules team, they used to love giving me a ball down in Melbourne to kick because Victorians thought it was biomechanically impossible to kick as badly as I kick. I look like a drunken giraffe on stilts when I kick, and that's insulting to the giraffe. So could I ever be out of form in Aussie rules? No, because to be out of form, have to be in
You had to have some. Yep.
Now, the third reason you fail is ability. Now, as I mentioned, I've been to 3 Olympics, multiple world championships, carried trophies on the MCG, SCG. You wouldn't be putting me in your team as an athlete. It's got no ability. Want to see my vertical leap? Want to see it again? Now, my point about that is when people come to me, it's not the first 3 things. As a parent, as a manager, as an actor, as a musician, I knew what to do, how to do it, the ability to do it. So that guy that was driving unsafely knew what to do, how to do it, and the ability to do it. Or somebody says, listen, you abused the customer. It's not my fault. She's the customer from hell. And not only that, that other staff member abused me. Look, I really appreciate you can't work anymore. What you're telling me is anytime we don't have perfect staff and perfect customers, you can't work here. And we don't have that. And so when people give excuses, what they're saying is I can't fix it. Whereas you see, as a manager, parent, teacher, coach, am I trying to change yesterday? No, I'm trying to change tomorrow.
Yep.
Things happen to me, like during this COVID experience, lots of people have responded poorly to COVID. But you see, I always say the highest degree you get in life is BHK, Bachelor Hard Knocks.
Yep.
Learn by your mistakes. That's why I'm so well educated. I have stuffed up so many times.
Yep.
And I've got better. And so power positive doing is saying, always ask yourself, is what I'm doing making it better or making it worse? So if I come to your company and you're saying, listen, we're not being successful anymore, or you could have changed, or society could have changed. It's like blacksmiths in the 1900s. People are having horseless carriages. Now, the good blacksmiths learn about mechanics. The poor blacksmiths said, if only horses were still here.
Yeah.
And the same thing as we came to the digital age, you just mentioned your situation. You know, you can say, do I embrace the digital age? Or do I say, I really wish I could still use my fax and my Xerox and, you know, all that sort of stuff, because it ain't too good. And for me, I mean, I still have my cameras with film in it. Now, I don't use it much because there's not many places I can do that. Or some of us can say, hang on, things have changed. So we have to embrace change. So rather than if only I do what, when I say if only, it's always things beyond my control have to change. So I feel good about failing until they change. Winners say, only if I do what can I make this obstacle an opportunity. Only if I do what make this problem a potentiality. So when we do that, puts us back in control. And our brain says, listen, whenever you're trying to fix things in life, I will give you energy and resilience. Now, I was called Dr. Phil long before that guy in America. And by the way, my accent, I was born in Adelaide. That's another long story. A woman said, Dr. Phil, I'm so depressed. I can't get out of bed. What should I do? And of course I said, get out of bed.
Yeah.
Her brain was saying, staying in bed's not working. Where she'd been taught, until you feel good, you can't act good. And I'm saying, no, you don't have to feel good, act goodly. But when you act goodly, it feels good. So anyway, I've raved on a lot, haven't covered a lot of your questions, so I'll put it back to you. I hope you don't mind me raving on, but I find it's important for people to understand the rules of the game.
Yeah, no, and I think I'll even break this down into two sections with and have this as a section, and if with your permission, I can follow on with some of the other questions. I can have another little section to it. So it reminds me of the shoe sales guys, and they sent a team of 2 guys off into Africa.
Great story.
And they noticed that no one wore shoes. So the first guy reported back that there's no market for shoes down here because no one wears them. The second guy phoned back and said there's a fantastic opportunity down here. No one's got them.
Yeah, that was a New Guinea illustration. And the guy actually did break all the shoe sales records, because he actually said, if they don't have shoes, they don't know what advantage you can give them. And the other guy simply said, well, if only they had shoes, would there be a market? And that's the key.
Yep.
The guy that said they don't have shoes felt bad, said if only they had shoes.
Yep.
The guy without it said, only if I do what? Now they don't have shoes, can I get a market? It's a great story.
Yeah, I think, Phil, that there's growing evidence, obviously, and particularly it's been highlighted in the field of sports, where probably 80% of performance is up here, and the other 20% is what you learn on the training track. So, and you were right at the forefront of all of that. So I'd like to ask you, Phil, you've dealt with some, pretty high-profile people, and I know, and big companies. What would you think? What would be the number one thing that you've applied to some of the things for big companies that a small one-man band can apply in their business if it was just one 30-second tip on what they could do differently? What would that be?
Never worry about intangibles. Don't have a vision of excellence. Always ask what actions will make things better. Because if you can't see it, you can't fix it. And if you can't see it, you can lie to yourself. So whether you be a KPMG or whether you be the local shoe salesman, he actually could say, listen, if I'm doing this, my business will improve. If I'm doing that, my business will improve. But if I don't do this, my business will go downhill. And so the key here is for all people, same thing in sport. You mentioned before, it's up here. I've not seen up there. Never looked on up there. What I'm saying is, what are you doing when your computer's on? What are you doing in business when you're being successful? What are you doing when you're failing? What are you doing when you're not being successful? And therefore, if I do A, I'm successful. If I do Z, I'm unsuccessful. And I'm doing Z and I want to be successful, then go back to A and stop doing Z.
Yep. Pretty simple, but a lot of people get tied up there. Phil, you've worked with the likes of England, South Sydney in the Rugby League. I actually have John Dutton, the CEO of the next Rugby League World Cup, who I did an interview with, and he'll be on this show. He had some interesting insights. You said before you also worked with Sri Lanka and Bangladesh cricket, 3 Olympics, a Davis Cup. How can a business with staff, and I know you've covered a fair bit of this, but your processes of what would be just one little sound bite if you owned a business with any staff members, what would be just the one thing, if you only had one choice, that you would simply portray with those staff?
I would be looking at what are the handbrakes for people performing at their A level. Everybody, if you have a good staff, if you have a test team, if you have a Davis Cup, whatever, the staff you have should be performing. I'm not just talking about the players, coaches, whatever. So my one thing I'd be saying is, if I have the staff and I have the potential, but I'm not getting the productivity, I'm looking at what's their handbrake to doing that. Most probably their handbrake are if only statements, if only things were better, if only things were different. and we have to change it to only if. But that's the number one thing. Rather than looking for motivation, and it's actually interesting, the word motivation originally never meant incentive. It went to the old days when they said, oh, we've noticed motion has started occurring before it did. There must have been a handbrake that was removed. So nowadays, when we talk about motivation and motivating staff, we're talking about how can I give an incentive to get them to perform? Whereas originally, the great managers were those people who said, what are the handbrakes to them performing so that we can remove them and facilitate them performing so they don't need me. They don't need an incentive from me.
Yep. Yep, absolutely. Phil, Dr. Alan Peace, I don't know if you've ever run into him. He's another guy that I've known for 40 years up in the Sunshine Coast, and he was on my last show. Obviously, he's in the founder of Body Language and all the series. What part does body language and psychology, do they fit together?
Well, they can, except for me, I'm not terribly worried about body language in general sense. Like I'm not there to find out, are you telling the truth or are you approaching or avoiding, which is very valid stuff, but I'm not into forensic stuff, psychology. But what I do notice is that when people tend to turn the shoulder towards you, we call it the cold shoulder. So if I meet you at the airport, you expect me to point with my belly button towards you, arms wide, because you know there's no hassle. On the other hand, if I turn my shoulder towards you and say hi, you say, hey, there's something here. And so in a sense, the only body language I really look at are people trying to get closer or further. And if people are trying to get further away, then there's a handbrake to that relationship. And for example, I always say the customer's not always right, but the customer has a right to think they're right. I'm not important enough for that customer to spend all night to get annoyed at me. I mentioned that somebody complained about what I said. I wasn't important enough that they wanted to put me down. What happened is I gave them some evidence, and this, in my case, I thought it was false evidence, but gave them some evidence that they thought was valid to attack me. Mm-hmm. Now, if I want to perform in life, I've always got to say, okay, what do I do about that evidence that they falsely inferred says something bad about me? So what we have to do is have a dialogue. Now, they have a right not to talk to me. They say, listen, I don't want to talk to you, Glove. And they have a right. But what I have always tried to do is saying, if I've given some evidence, whether it be advertently, inadvertently, I need to find out what can I do to make it better. And that's what life's all about. What can I do to make this situation better? Now, sometimes you can't. As you know, some customers, they're having bad lives, their marriage is breaking up, and they want to take it on somebody, and they're going to take it on you. But the big thing I have to make sure is I don't join them. I don't judge. I look at the behaviors. This is what we can do. That's what we can't do. And I don't judge them as being horrible people.
Yep.
Because who knows what I would have done in their shoes. And remember, empathy is not what I do if I was in your shoes, because what Phil Jauncey do in your shoes is irrelevant. It's actually trying to work out, why do you think this is a good strategy for you? And when people come to me in pain as a psychologist, and all the time, they have strategies that are causing them pain. And I have to work rather than judging that they've stuffed their life up. I understand because they didn't know the rules of the game, but I want to help them do better. And a great psychologist back in the 50s and 60s by the name of Carl Rogers, he said, what people need in life is positive, unconditional regard. What he meant by that is that no matter what you've done wrong, for example, I worked in prisons with murderers and rapists and stuff. And the point about that is I hate their behavior, but I accepted them as a human being. And the same thing, if you're a negative client, a negative customer, I have to think you're still a worthwhile human being. I may reject your behavior, and your behaviors may require responses on my part. But how can I deal with you? I tell the story years ago, there was a teacher, second year out, really inexperienced. And she handled the situation really well. I just happened to be in the room and observed it. And I was really impressed with this young girl. I say young girl, she would have been 22, but for my age, that's young. And anyway, a parent came in. As you know, parents know the kids are liars unless they said something about the teacher. And the parent came in, and really was haranguing this teacher. And she had every right to be upset that she'd been abused. But she went, listen, I'm really puzzled. And to me, the two most powerful words in English language is I'm puzzled. Because when you say I'm puzzled, person always says about what, and they relax a bit. So I'm puzzled. What? Well, what you're saying doesn't sound like what happened. Well, Johnny told me that yesterday you did this, this, and this. Well, actually, do you mind? You tell me what Johnny said, and I'll tell you what I think. You saying Johnny's lying? No, probably somewhere between the two. What I believe to be true isn't absolutely true. What he believes is true. So let's talk about it. So, well, Johnny said you did this. And every time the parent talked, voice came lower. Johnny said you did this and this. Teacher said, oh, okay. So I thought Johnny did this and Johnny did that. And then the teacher said, I'm really glad you're here because I've been worried about Johnny. And the parent ended up having a really good conversation. Now, the goal of that conversation was that teacher was worried about the parent's unhappiness and worried about Johnny. She could have worried about how dare you put me down as a human being. And that was unacceptable.
Yep.
But it wouldn't have fixed anything.
Yep.
And it gets back to the question asked ages ago. Is what I'm doing getting me where I want to get? Is what I'm doing making it better or making it worse? And that young teacher was smart enough, rather than taking offense, to say, how can we do it? Now, the parent could have rejected her and got nowhere, but at least the teacher could have said, at least I didn't get angry.
Yeah, give it the opportunity. Absolutely. Phil, you've worked with some of the biggest organizations and companies in the world. If there's any smaller, maybe bigger businesses out there that were listening and they're trying to get a contract with a big company or the next size in their target range, what would be one little strategy that you would employ to get that next bigger client, whatever big looks like for you?
The biggest strategy is not to get the client. The biggest strategy is ask yourself, why would the client be better using me? I always tell people, never try to make a sale, but influence a buy. And I tell the story years ago, back in the 90s. I'd been given this interview. And at that stage, my wife was a teacher and I was a consultant, another word for unemployed. And anyway, they wanted me to train their staff. Now, this company was basically a company that had teenagers and 20-year-olds, and they called them captains, vice captains. And they called me in and they said, we want you to run this course. And I needed it badly. I mean, I really needed the money. I needed the business. And I looked at him, I said, no, you don't want me. I said, why? I don't think it'll work. If I did that, you'd be wasting your money on me. Anyway, they called me back in. They said, we want to give you the business. Now, years later, after they sold the business, I bumped into one of the owners and he said, Phil, you know why we got you? I said, no. He said, we had two other people, and I didn't realize other people were going for it. And they said they do exactly what we wanted. But you're worried about fulfilling my needs. And I think, and I used to spend time when you get these things that people give you to, this is our estimation what we want. Now, a lot of times, those documents, you've heard about a committee has to design a horse, end up with a camel. And they had all these things in the document. And I'd look at it and say, well, what's the horse within the camel? And when we started winning all these things, business, because instead of trying to get the business, we try to ask ourselves, would we actually be a benefit for the company? Now, got to a point, the company asked me, Phil, we want you to do tenders all the time. Now, I'm a people person. Sitting doing tender is not my thing. So I told him I wasn't Elvis Presley. Don't love me tender. Yep. But I said I couldn't do that. But I think the thing is we won tenders, not because we gave you the best response. I actually put the tender response in some appendix. But I put, this is what we can do to help your business go better.
Yep.
And that got us business. So what I'm thinking, if you want to take that next step up, rather than think, how can I get this person to give me a contract? See, that's all about me. It's really, what can I do that after the contract, they'd be better off? I always say in sales that if I'm the salesperson and you're the client, and if I know everything you need, with all my expertise and your needs, I would have got what I got you to get. In other words, I'm doing you a favor. And I always wonder why people find it hard to get referrals. See, I have no problem getting referrals because people refer me because I did them a favor. If I merely did what I was said in the specs of the tender document and I fulfilled it absolutely, but they didn't get the the progress, the production, the profit that they should have, I've done them badly. And so my goal is always to make sure that whenever I'm offering my business to somebody, how will you be better off? And if I can't think that, I won't accept the business. Now, sometimes I didn't get it. It wasn't always like that company. But I found overall, it's always helped me because it means that people know when I'm talking to them, like right now when I'm talking to you, I want the people who are listening to be better off. And so my goal is how can they be better off? Not how can get, oh, we better buy, go to Phil's website and buy one of Phil's 3 books.
Yep.
I mean, it's not about that.
Yep.
It's about what can they do to be more successful. So when people come to me and their marriage is no good, I'm thinking, I want you to leave here so you have a better chance of making your marriage successful, better chance of making your sport successful, a better chance of making your company successful. So getting back to your simple question, the simple advice is don't try to make a sale, influence a buy. Ask yourself, why would it be in your best interest to use me rather than why is it in my best interest to get that contract from you?
Thanks. Yeah, that's a great tip. Phil, I talk about outsourcing stuff that you don't like doing and you're not good at. What are your thoughts on that just quickly?
Absolutely. My wife was an English teacher for years. And I'm one of these people, my profile hates attention to detail. And I had all these spreadsheets and stuff to do things. And once my wife became my PA, it just allowed me to do things that were so much better. And I think, why should I spend my time and effort on something I'm no good at? So now I can actually tell people that I sleep with my secretary and my wife doesn't mind. But I remember years ago, and you're talking about MLC, I had an MLC insurance agent, and he was complaining about all the time he had to spend doing some of the bureaucratic paperwork. And this is back in the 80s. I said, mate, you can get a 15-year-old out of high school, pay her $15 an hour, whatever it was back then, because he was earning 150 when he was selling. Said, let her do your work. And you don't need it full time. You can do it after school or part-time, whatever. And so when you paid her 150, those 10 hours that she did that, you had 10 hours to earn 1,500. And what's the smartest thing to do there? And I think one of the things is, Clint Eastwood years ago in a movie said, you got to know your limitations. Attention to detail, I can do, but it's a pain in the butt for me. And the last thing I'm going to do is set up a business where I have to do that. For example, I'm a people person. So I want to be in a business as a people person. I don't want to be sitting here doing tenders. Now, conversely, if I'm a non-people person and my business requires a lot of client interaction, then I need to get somebody else who's good at that, because the last thing I want to do is not look forward to what I'm doing to earn a crust. And so it's very important you look at your limitations and ask yourself, where will I make more money? Spending my time doing something I'm incompetent at, or spending my time doing something competent at, and paying somebody who's competent to do a better job than me.
Yep, that's spot on in my opinion as well. Phil, Cambridge Analytica, you probably saw that with all the so-called influence in elections and whatnot. And we're talking about, I guess, AI and big data psychology here now. Just what's your quick take on where we're going in the world on that?
Well, one of the problems with artificial intelligence and all this data income we get, one of the mistakes they make is they assume that we human beings, if we do something, we're the same. And that's the flaw in the data. For example, I could talk to a prisoner, as I mentioned, I worked in prisons, biggest rapist, murderer. That doesn't mean he's telling a lie. He can be honest. And sometimes, yes, you can get all sorts of threads and streams. So for example, if you saw everything I bought and you know 100% what I bought, when I buy, yes, when I go to the supermarket, I will probably get the same sorts of things. And so if you have those things in front of me, I'll be more tempted to get them. And yet we all do things that are atypical. And I think one of the problems with artificial intelligence, it loses that thing called instinct. And it loses that thing, that personal ability. So for example, in your business, and we're just talking about this before, if I need your help in my business, if all I get is a computer program that you've run in my business, and you say, here's the data. I've seen this a lot where people have all these things about people. They got all the personality data for people, and they treat like everybody's the same. And quite often it's wrong. And what people want is experts sitting there. Okay, we looked at the data, but actually looking at your business. or looking at your part of England, this may be true in London or Middlesex, but it may not be true where you are. And it's the same thing they're finding with all the data, trying to get, how effective are the vaccines. Sure, some people get blood clots, but how many people get blood clots anyway?
Yep.
And so the question is that data gives you percentages, gives you odds. But I could have flipped a coin 50 times and got tails. The next time I flip the coin, it's still a 50-50 chance.
Yep.
I get tails or heads. And yet the stats would say, no. It's a much higher chance, this flip, that I get heads because I've had 50 tails before it.
Yep.
But in fact, the actual flip is still 50-50.
Yep.
In the big picture, that might be the case. So what I worry about is that never take away our human ability, our human instincts, our human judgment. Look, data is great. It's really good to get that data. It's really good to look at influences. It's really good to see what populations think. But don't take away that really special thing we have in here called human instinct and human intuition.
Good point. Phil, you've met over your lifetime and career some very famous and well-to-do people. Who's been the most interesting individual that you've ever run across, and why were they?
Well, I've got to watch because, as you know, when I talk to people, I can't really use names and stuff. But when I talk about, for example, in Australia, 2 major coaches or 3 major coaches I've worked with, had a lot of time with, and looked at their strengths. For example, Wayne Bennett was a rugby league coach, 71, young whippersnapper, 2 years younger than me, who's still coaching. And his greatest skill was not in the tactical side, but in the people management side. So as he's got older, he's made sure he's got really good tactical coaches with him. Lee Matthews, an Aussie rules coach. He again, his strength was understanding players, finding what works for them, understanding the organization of a football department. So he took a side that was wooden spoon, which means last, people don't follow that terminology, to winning 3 championships in a row. And John Buchanan, who was in charge of Australia cricket, worked with him. And he was the first guy to bring in data, which was done before, computers and stuff. And yet he quickly learned that an Alan Border, who was a wonderful player, didn't know how to use a laptop and wasn't interested. So he was able to say to Alan, look, we're getting this information. We're now finding that against these type of batsmen and these type of players, if you use these fields, these bowlers, it goes well. And he kept it general. And John Buchanan now is he actually coaches managers and businesses. Yep. And talks about how do you get to Mount Everest, because one of his illustrations that he uses that when we were trying to win a World Cup, he, rather than worrying about how you get to the top, he said, how do you get to the base camp?
Yep.
What do you have to have at the base camp? And then once you're at the base camp, who do you want to get to the next step? And he worked that out and he broke it down. And so these great coaches, all of them worked out, is that they were there not to lead Errol Flynn wise, but to facilitate. Facile in Latin means to make easy, to facilitate performance. So that if you ask the players, Shane Warne would definitely say this about John Buchanan, ask the players what they thought about the coaches. They're good, but we did it ourselves. And the greatest manager is one where the staff saying, we could have done this without him or her.
Yep.
And it's not about ego. It's that they were facilitated, they were empowered to get there. And so what I find is the most influential people who you deal with in the world, and you go through history, you look at some of the great people right back through history, and you find what made them great was that they didn't act greatly. They facilitated, they empowered, and they enabled people to reach their pinnacle of height and help them achieve what they didn't expect themselves. Wayne Bennett used to have this thing in the Broncos rugby league that's in Brisbane. And you had up there in the training room, God, give me a coach that asked more of me than I'd ask of myself. And I think that's, if you look at the greatest managers, leaders, teachers, presidentials, prime ministers, whoever, what made them great is they made other people greater than they thought they could be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Phil, you're always busy and on the move, and I know you've got a few projects on at the moment. What's your most favorite that you're working on right now?
Well, right now, because of the COVID, Like I'd never even heard of Zoom 12 months ago. And it's amazing how you had to take things like that on board. So actually, no, I've got a project that I'm writing. It's actually a religious project. I'm looking at how the writers of the Old and New Testament, their views of emotional health, how it affects us today. So that's just something my son and I are doing that. But also just, again, looking at how people have felt the emotional issues of being, the world changes. For example, I love traveling overseas and can't do that for a while. Haven't had my injection yet, even though I'm over 70, supposed to be due for it. But I'm looking forward to doing that. But the biggest thing now is doing like I'm doing with you, helping people understand the rules of the game, because I want to become redundant. I'm 73, I can't do this forever. And the more and more people can understand, and there's a saying I've been using for 50 years, and it goes like this: if it is to be, it's up to me. And I really like that. And I mentioned religion before, and you don't have to be religious, but one of my favorite verses of the Bible says this: there's no situation given us in life that is too difficult for us to handle, that within that situation, we always have the power and the resources to deal with it. So if I come down with fatal cancer, only a year to live. If I say, if only I didn't have cancer, probably be dead in a year. But if I say, only if I do what, can I make this next 2 years good? I'll probably live 4, still die. And I think the key here is that our ability to respond to whatever happens is one of the greatest gifts we've been made when we're born. And let's not deny that. Will we stuff up? Absolutely. Will we make mistakes? Sure. But what we can say is, what are we doing? And somebody once said, you might not like what I'm doing, but it's a heck of a lot better than what you're not doing.
Yep. Phil, there's a lot of, there'll be some medium-sized businesses out there, sporting organisations and whatnot. So if anybody has had a little bit of resonation about our discussion today, would you like me to field any inquiry and pass them through to you?
By all means, do that. Or they can always get onto my website, which is really easy, Phil Jauncey. And you Google that or whatever, Bing it, whatever the term you want to do, and you can get it. Getting me to talk, I tell people getting me to talk is like getting a drunk to drink. It's not hard. I love talking. Talk underwater.
We'd never have guessed. So I'll put the details in the show content, Phil. It's been an absolute pleasure. We could have done this for another hour or two easily today. Your thoughts are quite outstanding, and when I first heard them 40 years ago, they're probably more relevant today than then. So that's testament in itself. So thank you very much for being a part of our show today, and I'm sure everybody will take away some hints and tips and thoughts to get their business life better. On behalf of everybody listening, Phil Jauncey, thank you very, very much.
Thank you for looking me up again after all these years, and I've really appreciated to have a forum where I can help people help themselves.